Welcome to the 15 Minutes with a Farmer podcast from Successful Farming, where quick conversations reveal big truths about agriculture and life. I'm your host, Lisa Faust-Prater. Most people think of their woods as a place to hunt, walk, or maybe cut timber every few decades. But what if your timber could produce income every season without cutting a single tree? Today, we're heading to the hills of Georgia with Extension Forester Jacob Williams, who's showing farmers how to grow value right under the canopy, things like ginseng, goldenseal, mushrooms, and medicinal herbs. He'll share what it takes to get started, the markets that make it work, and how to manage a forest that pays its way while staying wild. In the next 15 minutes, we're digging into non-timber forest farming. Jacob, thank you so much for joining me on 15 Minutes with a Farmer.
Thanks for having me.
So this whole idea started when I got an email from a listener named Julia Ripley, who asked if I knew anyone who could talk about non-timber forest farming. And to be honest, when I first read that email, I wasn't quite sure what she was talking about. I was excited to find you as an expert, both in the capacity of a person with extension and also doing this on your own. First of all, can you just sort of explain what forest farming is?
Yeah, so forest farming is a subset of a bigger category, agroforestry. Sometimes you might hear people, you mentioned that non-timber forest crops or non-timber forest products. Forest farming, these are all kind of generally the same things. And when we're talking about these types of practices, we're really referring to those things that grow underneath the canopy of the trees. So we could be talking about mushrooms. We could be talking about ginseng, goldenseal, black cohosh, blue cohosh, all kinds of different crops out there that kind of fall into that category.
So you're growing ginseng. I know that's a valuable non-timber crop. How did you get started with ginseng, and how long does it take before you can, harvest a crop?
I've had an interest in native plants for a long time. There's a New York Times article that's like from 1975, I think, and it was written about the area that I live in. This reporter came down and he wrote an article on ginseng and all these people growing it. I found this article. I was, browsing the internet one day, and this kind of piqued my interest, and talked to some people around the area where I live, and they're like, yeah, I remember some of those people, some of the old timers mentioned in this article from 50 years ago. And so it just kind of piqued my interest, like, can you still do that? And then my in-laws own some land nearby, and so just talking with them and saying, hey, would y'all mind if I went and can I just throw some seed out there and kind of see what starts to happen? And so just kind of threw a lot of seed out in a lot of different places, and just to see what came up, trying to figure out what sites are more suited for growing ginseng, because ginseng is really it's a long-term crop. There's a couple of different ways you can grow it. The way that I grow it is what you would call wild simulated. So you're kind of trying to mimic the way it would be growing in the wild. So basically, that means, you go out, you find what you think is a suitable site, you start planting seed there, but the management that you put into it is relatively minimal from year to year. And so the hope is that when it comes time to harvest that plant, which could probably take 8 to 10 years, maybe more, depending on the conditions, and there's a lot that can go wrong in that amount of time.
Yes, there is.
But, voles, deer, humans, root diseases, all kinds of things can happen in that amount of time. But then the hope is that when you get to that point where it's ready to harvest, you have a root and that looks like a wild root, because that's going to hold more value in the marketplace.
That is so fascinating. I had no idea what went into producing ginseng. Just thinking about my own timber and how it's such a diverse ecosystem. Maybe you have a stream, you have hills, it's rocky in some areas, and it's maybe there's a slope or there's more shade. So what is the sort of dream area for growing ginseng? What does that look like?
So if you can find it, the ideal conditions for ginseng would be north-facing slope, and you can do it on a fairly steep slope. That's what I've found from my personal experiences. That ends up being more work for me, because that means I have to walk up and down that mountain.
Right.
The ginseng may not mind, but my legs get tired. But you do want some slope for runoff, for drainage of the water. Ginseng generally, it likes a lot of calcium. So we're looking for poplar grows. Those tend to be calcium accumulators. So that's a good indicator. That's a lot of calcium in the soil there. But we're also looking at the forest floor and looking for some indicator plants. Old timers, you might hear them call it sang sign, this phrase they might use. And so for that, we're looking for things like Christmas fern or Jack in the pulpit. If you see those, that's a good indication that ginseng could also grow in this site. And really, we're also it's ideally we want it to be kind of a mesic site, so we don't want it to be too wet or too dry, just kind of somewhere, nice, right in that Goldilocks zone, just right.
You mentioned Jack in the Pulpit. That's one of the things that my dad always taught me about, like when we would go look for morels in the spring. Again, here in Iowa, it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But he said, it's time to go out to the timber when the flowers start to bloom on the wild plum trees. And then when you get out there, when you see like the Sweet Williams and the Jack in the Pulpits, like, the timing is right. It's so interesting when you look back at like what your dad, your grandpa, like the old timers, like you said, they know, they make those observations and those things still hold true.
With a lot of these, like we talked about ginseng and goldenseal and some of these mushrooms, I think there's a real connection to a lot of culture and heritage there as well, more so than you would find with maybe some of our more traditional crops like corn and soybean. And kind of there's a connection to history there that I think is underappreciated, which just that just brings in another facet of these plants that's just makes them interesting to learn about and to grow.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned the ginseng, but are you growing any other sort of forest crops on your family's land?
I do some golden seal too, which is it's a bit quicker of a crop. We're talking probably 4 to 5 years before it would be ready to harvest. And that's another crop like ginseng where you're harvesting the root of it. That's what's valuable. And so when you harvest it, that kills the plant. So as extension agent, not just a grower, when I'm talking to people about these things, I always try to encourage people to try to do this in a sustainable way so that you're, kind of have a crop year after year where you're not just plant everything and you go wipe it out all in one year. Try to make this sustainable. I also do some ramps. It's like a wild onion, and some of these things that I'm talking about, these are Appalachian native plants, and ramps are as well. So ramps are part of Appalachian cuisine. They're very strong, and people use them in all kinds of recipes nowadays. So a little bit goes a long ways with ramps, but they're another kind of really fascinating plant.
Yeah, I love how that ties into the regional culture, and and you look at those like old recipes and just the kind of traditional cooking that people do in different parts of the country. That what's right outside their door is what people use, and that's not the kind of thing you can always just get at the grocery store. So it's great that you're able to still grow those in the forest. Conservation and timber management can be tricky. It's not like you're there all the time. Like in my case, my timber's 20 miles away from, my house. But when you have a reason to go there, maybe then you're more aware of like what's happening and you can notice changes, or you see if there's a disease issue or, a problem with erosion someplace or something that you need to deal with. How do you manage the sort of balance between conservation and production?
There is a balance there for sure. Because one issue that I've seen is that while these are plants that like to grow in the shade, they do need some sunlight, and so there does need to be some timber management there, because if there's not, that canopy will be too dense. Might be a good thing to think about, like some selective thinning, or maybe doing some burns. Work with the folks who are in charge of that in your state.
Let's talk for a minute about the markets for these products. Where are you selling them? How does that whole system work?
In every state where ginseng is grown, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service mandates that that state has to have a ginseng program. It would be managed by your state's natural resource division, state agency. They're required to have a list of people who buy and sell ginseng, and so that makes it a little bit easier to get to market. You can call those people up. September 1st through December 31st, that's the ginseng harvest season. The ginseng demand is really driven largely by China. And so a lot of
Oh,
that ends up being exported to China. So they're the ones who kind of drive the market price for that ginseng. You might be able to find someone who's an herb dealer, and sell things to them. But also some of these other things, like if you're talking about mushrooms that are mushrooms for eating, not like for medicinal purposes, maybe working with a local
mhm.
restaurant or a local farmer's market, something like that. I'm going to turn it into a finished added value product. Like a tincture or a salve or something like that, and then I'm going to sell that to the public, myself, or sell that to someone else who's going to sell it to the public. So you do kind of have to think a little bit creatively about these things sometimes, about how you're going to get them to market. And I should also mention the good extension agent thing is that most of these things that we're talking about, these are usually side gig, not
Mhm.
necessarily are going to replace like a full-time income, but these are things that people would like to do on the side, like I do. And just for the joy of it, and for that kind of extra income that brings.
Is there any sort of, like oversight or regulations or anything?
So yeah, for sure. There's really two different ways of harvesting these types of crops. So what I've been talking about is folks who, including myself, who cultivate these things. Like we
Right.
plant it and we know where we plant it, and so it's coming up. We're tracking. I'm keeping records to keep track of when this is ready. There's also a wild foraging side to this as well. Some of these things have become more restricted for wild foraging on public land
Mm.
because there's been loss of habitat, over harvesting, and so you're legally required to get a permit for that wild foraging on public land. Some of these are endangered species, and so that kind of creates a little bit of more paperwork, usually on the front end. Like with goldenseal, that's basically you having the paperwork to say, I got this seed or I got this rhizome that I grew this crop from I didn't harvest it from the wild. Like I bought this from somebody. So it's just kind of trying to prove that you didn't steal it, kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, for farmers listening who maybe have some forest land on their property, what are sort of the first steps that they should take to see if A, it's appropriate for their location, and B, what sorts of things they should look into?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great resources online that people can look at for that have lots of extensions, and different states have publications on these types of things. I'm a member of the Appalachian Forest Farming Coalition. That would be a great place to go look. I would say talk to your local extension agent about hey, is anybody else doing this around here? Is this something that sounds feasible to you? Um, if you kind of decide what you want to grow, and you want to try it, I would encourage you to do a soil test as well. I got to be a good extension agent, say do a soil test. Um, but and for these things, like I mentioned, like the calcium with ginseng, that's important, and so that kind of give you an idea. Do I need to add calcium in this site or not? Um, and then I would encourage you for the first year or two that you're looking at growing these things. Um, I would say cast a wide net, because even after reading and trying to get all that information, it's still going to take some experience and some practice to really determine where are the best sites on my land. And so, just experiment a little bit. Plant some things here and some things there, and just see what comes up next year. What does better the following year.
Yeah, and probably find a way to keep track of where you plant that stuff.
I use Google Maps,
Nice.
and so I zoom in on my phone as close as I can to that spot, and then I drop a pin, and that gets you pretty close. But I would also say take some pictures. That can be helpful as well, because if you've walked through the woods before on your property, it looks different at different times of year. So I mean, you may go out in the fall and plant some seed, and then you come back in the spring to see, okay, well, is it coming up? And you're like, this place looks completely different. So, and and you can put out some some landscape flags, that kind of thing, because I've done that. I was like, I thought I planted stuff here last year, but I can't find it this year. Like, where is it? And it's like, well, it's 100 yards that way. So yeah, that happens.
That's a great use of technology with the Google Maps and dropping a pin and taking photos. I love it. Well, this is all just been so interesting. I thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with us, and I'm so glad that I got that email because, like I said, this is something that I really knew absolutely nothing about.
Hey, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Open the latest issue of Successful Farming. Visit us online at agriculture.com and subscribe to 15 Minutes with a Farmer so you never miss a chance to connect with the people who feed, clothe, and fuel the world.